me stay a little bit closer. Um, Good afternoon. It is. Well, uh, I would like to publicly say that, Dirk, thank you for that song, and I'm looking for another one. Yeah. So actually, it is pretty late, 10 past 12. So I can say the shortest sermon ever, okay? Can we trust the Bible? Yes, amen. Thank you. Welcome, praise team, and that would be the shortest sermon. I know that some of you may ask a question, hey, is it the reason why we are talking about this? Because I'm pretty sure that all of us who are here, we believe that we can trust the Bible, right? Okay. But here's the thing. The thing is that I truly believe that we as a Seventh-day Adventists, we shouldn't be only people of faith, but I believe that we should also be apologetics. We should be defenders of our faith. We should understand why we believe in such and such of things, okay? The problem that I have with understanding things is that basically what I've learned during my almost 12 years of service, I just learned that usually the more knowledge we have, usually the less love we have. That's something that I learned, okay? So please, today I will give you a lot of arguments that we can trust the Bible, but please don't use this in a way that sometimes I see the Christians that are looking at atheists and they are saying, oh, you're an atheist, you're such a dumb person, we know that the Bible is reliable, and so on and so on. Don't do it, please don't do it. But I want to share these thoughts with you because I really believe that as a Seventh-day Adventist, we should understand why we believe in such things, and especially when we understand that I really believe that, oh, my fault? Yeah, it works. I really believe that we are at spiritual warfare, okay? And actually, these are things that I really believe that are under attack of atheists and sometimes of other Christians, okay? Such things like the Bible. And actually, I can tell you that today, for a little while, I will play devil's advocate, okay? And I will give you the arguments why people don't believe in the Bible. So there are plenty of things that are under attack. Creationism, under attack. Even less and less Christians believe in creation, in biblical creation. State of the death, Sabbath, heavenly temple, and spirit of prophecy that is under attack even in our church. So, actually, this is the list of topics that I want to talk about during probably whole year. Sounds like a good plan? I hope so. So, let's play devil's advocate. Oh, Pastor, shouldn't you be God's advocate? No, not this time. Okay, so there are some doubts about the Bible, okay? So the first doubt is, how can we be sure that the selection of books in the Bible is not tendentious? How can we be sure? It means that, hey, we have about 40 authors of the whole Bible, altogether 66 books, 39 in Old Testament and 27 in New Testament. How can we be sure that it wasn't like, and actually I will tell you a little bit more about this, but for example, did you know that the books of New Testament were chosen in 4th century? So how can we be sure that they chose those books, that they chose the books that are true, not those books that works for them? Very good question, right? Okay. How can we know, how can we be sure that the biblical stories are not made up? You know, you can write everything. Paper accepts everything, right? You can put everything on the paper. How can we be sure that those stories were not made up? And even if those stories are true, how can we be sure that all the details are correct, that no one changed them, you know, that no one tried to adjust the story, you know, to sound better? Do you think that those are good questions? I have another one. How can we be sure that the Bible, how can we be sure that the Bible hasn't been changed? You know that all the ancient books were changed? Some of them, like 20-30% was changed. Why the Bible should be exception from that rule? Why the Bible is different? Actually, I can tell you that all of those questions were asked in 18th century when actually the French Revolution started, and when atheism began well organized, and they started questioning the Bible. And these are those questions, and all of them are very reasonable, right? And another question, isn't the Bible full of errors? Isn't it? Oh, you know that I asked that question for a reason. So, because right now I am devil's advocate, I will even show you some errors. How old was Hezekiah when he became king? Because in 2 Kings, he was 22. In 2 Chronicles, he was 42. So how old was he? Actually, I can tell you he was 22, because if he were 42, it actually means that he should be 2 years older than his own father. Okay, so he was 22, and no doubts about this. But hey, this is in the Bible. Do you want to hear more errors? Did centurion visit Jesus personally? No, because in Matthew, it says that he visited him personally. And when Jesus was entered into Capernaum, there came unto him a centurion, beseeching him, and saying, Lord, my servant, and so on and so on. Okay? But Luke said that the centurion sent unto him the elders of the Jews. So which story is correct? Do you have any ideas? John, what do you think?
Well, I think this, that the object of the story, the subject of the story is what is true.
Okay,
The centurion sent to Christ. Whether he went there personally, whether he sent his servants to go there. The story is what counts. In his great faith, Christ recognized.
very good. We will talk about this later. Actually, I can even tell you something. Matthew was eyewitness of everything, right? But we can know that Matthew was focused on Christ's teachings. So actually, we have the sources that are saying that Matthew was very strict in writing all the Christ's speeches. That's why we can be sure that if Matthew put something different in a different way than any other gospel writer, right? And it is about Christ's teachings, we should probably stick more to Matthew. Okay? So we have a story like this. Another story. How many demon-possessed people did Jesus encounter? Because in Matthew, there met him 2 possessed with devils. But actually, Mark said there was a man with unclean spirit. So how many people? Oh, it depends, okay? It's not all. Who was first over the grave? Matthew says that there was Mary Magdalene and other Mary. Mark says that there was Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome. That's not it. Luke said that there was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and other women that were with them. Actually, I have to tell you, I am using King James Version, the most kosher Bible. But John says that there was only one Mary, and that's it. So who was first, and how many people there were? How many angels were in the tomb? Because Matthew says that there was the angel, one angel. But John says, and seeth 2 angels in white sitting, and so on and so on. Oh, but only one spoke. Okay, so I can tell you that even in that situation, we can see something very important. And, even if, for example, Matthew is mentioning something and other gospel writer doesn't mention it, it doesn't mean that this is error, right? How old was King Hezekiah? We know that when, during the 3,500 of years, actually from 2nd Chronicles, probably around 3,000 years from that time to our time, and when they were copying that verses, then probably someone could make that kind of error. But does it mean that there was no King Hezekiah? No, the story is true. And I can even tell you something more. There is a story about Wittgenstein poker. Okay? So, the story is true. Even book was written about this story. Okay? So the story happened in 1946. There were the biggest philosophers on our planet. Huge minds. So they met on a Cambridge University to talk about some philosophical issues, ethic issues. Okay? So they were discussing, and there was Karl Popper, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and Bertrand Russell. Okay? The biggest minds. And they were discussing it in front of the audience. Okay? So there were other peoples there. And suddenly, when Wittgenstein started speaking, he took the poker from fireplace, and you know what happened next? No one knows. You know why? Because Karl Popper, he said, he started threatening me with this poker. Some people said he put this poker into the fire to heat in it and, to threaten other people. But actually, Bertrand Russell said, no, yeah, that's true that he took this poker, and he was using it as an illustration of something, but there was no threat. Other people were saying that were from the audience, the huge brains. They were saying, well, yeah, this is true. He took this poker, but he did this only to do something with the fire. Okay? So Karl Popper said he took this poker and he hit this on the ground because he was so angry at me. And other people were saying, no, he didn't. So actually, we don't know what happened. The biggest minds. And all of them remember the story in a different way. So actually, I can tell you that there is a huge irony that our four Gospels are a little bit different. You know what's the irony? The irony is that those differences actually proves that those Gospels are true. You know why? Because if there was only four people who decided, to lie to everyone, don't you think that they should sit together, spend some time, made up one version, and stick to it? Right? Don't you think that they should do it? So, this is the irony. Because in fact, because all of them showed those stories from the different perspectives, it actually shows that they didn't make up that stories. And actually, I can even tell you, they were ready to give their own lives for that story. So, that's why I am saying this is wonderful, because we are not talking about errors. We are talking about small differences that actually shows that they were not trying to lie anyone. They just described everything as they remembered. And this is wonderful. You know that sometimes, even during the board meetings, I I can call all the board members that were at the meeting. I can call you, and I can ask, how did you remember something? And I guarantee that all of you will remember this a little bit, at least a little bit different. This is true. This is how it works. You know that even the judge, when he hears the same story from, let's say, eyewitness, and everyone is saying exactly the same, almost, sentence by sentence, everything the same, that you know what that judge should think, that they made that story and they stick to it. But it doesn't prove that the story is true, right? So, that's why those errors doesn't prove that the Bible is wrong. But the other question is, how can we be sure that the selection of books in the Bible are not tendentious? In other words, how can we be sure that when they created the canon of Old Testament and New Testament, how can we be sure that it is correct? Because I can tell you that there are two canons of Old Testament, both made by Jews. One is Hebrew and one is Alexandrian. The Alexandrian canon have several more books than Hebrew canon. I can even tell you that all the disciples and Jesus Christ, they were using Alexandrian canon. So how can we be sure that we should have 39 books in Old Testament, not 60-something? Well, with Old Testament, it's pretty easy, okay? Because the Hebrew canon, the one that we are using, was created by Ezra, this biblical Ezra. So actually, it have the authority from the prophet. This is one argument. It is correct with Torah. It works with Torah. It rejects all the books written by Kabbalists. You know who Kabbalists were? The Kabbalists were people who claim to have a hidden knowledge. So, for example, they believed that if you mention the name of an angel, this angel have to show and do his work. For example, one of those names is Raphael. So right now, just after saying that name, the archangel Raphael should show up here, and do his work. So the Kabbalists were people who were claiming that they have this secret knowledge. According to them, King Solomon was the wisest man, not because he was the wisest man, but because he created all the magic tricks, how to use these angels and these demons, and how to rule over them, and so on and so on. Actually, I can even tell you, if people believe in Kabbalah, and most of the Jews right now believe in Kabbalah, for example, they claim that the Sabbath is only for Jews. And you know why? Because everyone on this planet have one soul, but Jews have two souls. And the second soul is letting them to keep the Sabbath properly. Crazy, right? Uh, I would like to encourage you to try to read those books. And when you read it, you will understand why they are not in the Bible. But didn't I say that even Jesus Christ was using Alexandrian canon? It is true. But you know why? It is because when Septuaginta was created, the Septuaginta is a translation into Greek made by the greatest Hebrew scholars. And actually they translated all the books from Alexandrian canon. That's why apostles and Jesus they were using Septuaginta. In other words, they were using Alexandrian canon. But you know what? They didn't quote those books that are not in Hebrew canon. That they were not using them. So they were using translation, but not those books. So this is pretty easy about Old Testament, because if it is Torah compliant, if it works, and we know that the prophet created this and so on and so on, then we know that we can trust it. Of course, we know that there is also a Catholic canon of Old Testament, but they just use those books with those books they can prove immortal soul. And that's it. And that's it. So by using this canon, those books that we have in Old Testament, everything, we can be sure that it is true. But the New Testament is a little bit harder, because it's established in 4th century. Actually, so it's over 300 years after Jesus Christ died. So how can we be sure that they didn't choose only those books? Because you know what? We have around more than 60 Gospels from that time. And only 4 Gospels in the Bible. Around 60 Gospels were rejected by early Christians. If they rejected 60 books, 60 Gospels, how can we be sure that they didn't reject, something only because it didn't work for them? And for example, they rejected Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Judas, Gospel of Mary, and the Gospel of Truth. Hey, they rejected truth. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. What was the problem back then? The problem was that simultaneously with the Christianity growth, there were also a people who were trying to connect Greek philosophy with Christianity. For example, in Greek philosophy, we have how do they call this? Okay, they see the difference between sacred and profane. So sacred was something, that is holy. So it actually means that Jesus Christ, according to them, Jesus Christ couldn't come into this planet as a human because He is divine being. And as divine being, he couldn't be a human. That's why John, when he was writing his letters, he said, everyone who says that Christ came in flesh is from God. This is exactly why he said so. Because they were saying, no. As divine being, he couldn't be a person. So then they are saying, if he wasn't a true person, it actually means that he couldn't die on the cross. If he couldn't die on the cross, it actually means that it was only a scene, some theater, just something to show, but it wasn't true. That's why John had to write his letters. And actually, we know that there were more books that were not true. And how can we be sure? I would like to encourage you to read one book written by Richard Bauckham. I don't know how to read it. Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. I will give you only one argument from that book, okay? So, Richard Bauckham, I don't know how to read it. How would you read it? Bauckham? Bauckham? Okay. Thank you. So, he did something extremely huge. You know what he did? He took all the books from that time and that area, and he started counting the names. You know why? Because he wanted to create the list of most popular names from that time and that area. Okay? And when he created this list of the most popular names, he started to comparing it with our 4 Gospels, and he discovered something extremely huge. He discovered that when Gospel writer was using popular name, he always added some adjective to describe, That's why we have Mary Magdalene, we have Judas Iscariot, and so on, because that was popular name. But when Gospel writer was using the name that wasn't popular at all, he was just saying the name, period. That's it. You know why? I can tell you something. I checked one day in Poland, that was probably 15 years ago. In Poland, 38 million of citizens and only 300 Tytuses in whole Poland. When I discovered it, you know what I stopped doing? I stopped using my last name. What's the point? How many Tytuses do you know? Right? So he compared those names with 4 Gospels, and he discovered that it's always the same rule. But you know what? All the other Gospels, they don't even want to use the names. And if they are using them, we cannot see the same rule. In other words, actually I will give you another argument. He compared the list of animals, of all the plants that are there, and so on, and he realized that Gospels are always correct. For example, today we were discussing Zacchaeus climbing on sycamore tree, right? If someone wasn't living then in that place, that person shouldn't even know that sycamore tree was there, right? But this tree is even there in our times. We can literally see the same tree that Zacchaeus climbed on. This is amazing. So in other words, we have true proof that the gospel writers, those 4 gospels, they had to be eyewitnesses of everything that they described. But all the other gospels, they were not. They were not living that time. They were not living that area. They just heard something from other Christians, and they started to creating their own story. We have true proof. This is amazing. Because this is really something that I believe that God, He did this to give us this assurance that the Bible is true. And I can tell you that God cares about all the details. This is really amazing. Okay, other arguments, and we will do it much faster right now. How can we be sure that the biblical stories are not made up? I will give you, I actually already gave you an argument. This is a little bit mixed. Okay, so the first argument I already gave you, that the apostles, they were ready to give their own lives for that story. And this is really amazing, because if one day even one of them would say, no, that wasn't true, you know that all the people who opposed the Christianity, and there were plenty of them who hated Christianity, don't you think that they would like to use that one statement? Then, after the huge tortures, one of the disciples, rejected Christ and so on and so on. Don't you think that they would like to use that argument against Christianity? But it never happened. They were ready to give their own lives. How many people do you know that would like to give their lives for the story that they just made up? Right? Okay, this is from New Testament. What about Old Testament? For over 2,000 years, the Bible was the only source of knowledge about Hittite kingdom, about Nineveh, about Jericho. And you know what they were saying? The people who were against the Bible, they were saying those stories are false, because it is impossible that there was a huge kingdom of Hittites. And we don't know anything about them. They were saying it is impossible. Only Bible is saying about this, and this have to be true because we don't know anything about this. And you know what? One day, they dig one Hittite city and another one, and they said, oh wow, there was a huge civilization right there. But the Bible was the only source of that knowledge. And I can even tell you something, King Belshazzar, this is extremely great, okay? There were only 2 sources about King Belshazzar, 2 sources that were talking about King Belshazzar. One is Book of Daniel, and another one was from 5th century BC, from Greek historian Herodotus. But there is one difference. Herodotus didn't know the name. So when he was writing about King Belshazzar, he was writing about son of Nabonid. But he didn't know the name. 100 years after that story was happened, right? 100 years after that story, the biggest historian didn't know the name of King Belshazzar. He used only name. He named it King, son of Nabonid. So actually, only book of Daniel was the source of that name. So those people who were attacking the Bible, and especially book of Daniel, you know why they had to attack book of Daniel? Because in book of Daniel, chapter 7 and 8, you have huge prophecy. And this prophecy is so precise that they said this story, this book had to be written at least 300 years after that story. Because chapter 8 is saying directly, strictly, that there will be king of Media and Persia, and he will conquer the Babylon. And then there will be the king of Greece, and this king will conquer Media and Persia. And then he collapses, and his kingdom will be divided for 4 generals. This is exactly what Bible is saying. Extremely precise prophecy. So they said it had to be written after that story. It had to be. But there is a problem. Because Daniel, he was using the name King Belshazzar. So they said this story had to be made up. This name for sure is not true. There was no King Belshazzar. But actually, that was probably in 1940 something. They discovered a document from Babylon where King Nabonid, Babylonian King Nabonid, is writing, I am giving the authority to my son Belshazzar, and he's using that name, to my son Belshazzar. I give the authority to my son Belshazzar to rule in Babylonian city. The second source. No one knew that name even 100 years after that story happened. So how is it possible that Daniel knew the name and also wrote that prophecy? The only answer is he was a prophet. Bible is inspired by God, and he had to live in times of King Belshazzar. Okay. Moving forward, how can we be sure that the Bible stories are credible? That, they were not changed even a little bit, and so on and so on. Okay. I will ask you some questions. Don't you think that the story of Abraham in Egypt, don't you think that this is a little bit inconvenient? That we should erase that story? Because, if I was Jew, I would like to create the whole legend over someone who started everything. So what's the point of saying that Abraham lied to Pharaoh? Right? What's the point? If I was King David, I would like to hide the fact that one of my grandmothers was a prostitute and the other one was Moabite. I would like to hide it. If I was King Solomon, I would like to hide the story of David and Bathsheba, Don't you think, hey, he was living that time and he had the opportunity to erase that story from their books and to write a new story about huge love that King and David and Bathsheba had, and for example write something bad about Uriah, her husband, and create the story when King David was such a wonderful person that he rescued her from her bad husband. Don't you think that this is very reasonable? I would like to do it. But they didn't, because those stories are true. And the last thing I would like to say is about this argument is comparison of King Hezekiah and Assyrian King Sennacherib. You know why I use that illustration? Because we have the Bible story, and in that story, when King Sennacherib went to Jerusalem and he started, his threatening to King Hezekiah, do you remember what King Hezekiah did? He started praying and asked God for help. And the next day, the Bible is saying that the angel of God killed the army of King Sennacherib. Do you know how King Sennacherib described the story? I can tell you. So he described with all the details how he conquered all the cities before Jerusalem. And then he says, we went to Jerusalem, and that's it. He erased the story. Because the next, what he is saying is, then we went back. Who's doing this? Only the person who's trying to erase some facts from the Bible. And don't you think that King Hezekiah should do something like, oh yeah, we conquered King Sennacherib because we have such a wonderful generals and such a wonderful... Don't you think that that would be reasonable? He didn't. They said that was God who helped us. Right? That's why, for example, I can tell you something. Do you know that we don't have any historical proof other than Bible that Israelites came out from Egypt? Well, there are some things that people are trying to say that, hey, this is the proof, but we cannot be sure about this. And historians say, hey, there is no other proof than Bible, so we cannot believe this. It is not true, because this is exactly how history is made. The history is written by winners, and only by winners. So actually, if I was Pharaoh back then, and I just realized that, I sent my whole army to chase Israelites, and then I lost my whole army. You know what I would like to do? I would like to erase everything, just not to leave any proof that this story happened. Okay. How can we be sure that the Bible is inspired by Holy Spirit? I gave you one argument about prophecy from book of Daniel. I can even tell you that in the Bible, in Old Testament, we have over 300 prophecies about Jesus Christ. And you know what? You know that some of them are impossible to become true. For example, virgin birth. Is it possible? No. There are some Bible scholars that they are saying, no. But Prophet Isaiah didn't say the virgin. he used the word young lady. But you know what? It isn't true. And you know how we know this? We know that because Hebrew scholars, when they were translating Old Testament into Greek, they translated that verse as a virgin. So we know that it is about virgin. What are the odds? How big is the possibility that someone will be born from virgin? Do you know that the Bible, the Old Testament, is describing that the Messiah have to die and resurrect? In Isaiah 53, it is mentioned 3 times. Have to die and resurrect. What are the possibilities? None. And we have the prophecies that are saying exactly when Messiah will start, where Messiah will start. It is impossible that those prophecies can become true if they were not inspired by God. And the last thing, I believe this is the last thing. Oh, yeah. Okay, so when we are discussing these things with others, I've heard the argument, okay, so maybe the Bible, it is true that it was inspired back then, but you know, over 3,000 years, it have to be changed, and so on and so on. How can we be sure that the Bible hasn't been changed during that time? Do you know the argument? Some of you are smiling, so I assume that you know. Some of you may not know. Okay. Have you ever heard about Qumran and Dead Sea Scrolls? This is something, we don't have a time to tell this. I can just tell you, some of those books are from 2nd and 3rd century BC. And they compare it with the Bible that we have right now. And you know how many changes there were? About 1%. And in that 1%, nothing that changes the sense. I will give you one example of change. Probably Goliath was not 6 cubits tall. It was about 4 cubits, probably, according to those books that were found in Qumran. Does it change the story? Well, no, because it still means that he had to be at least 8 feet tall, between 8 feet and 10 feet tall. Was he huge? Yeah, but this isn't changing anything. This is really amazing because I really believe that God is the one who created everything in a way that right now, as a biblical Christians, we can say, yes, we have the proof. We know that the Bible is inspired. We know that everything that is in the Bible is true. Yes, we can stick to the Bible. Yes, this is something that we can believe. And if the Bible is saying that Jesus Christ came here and gave his life to save us, we know that this is true. And God, he took care of all the details. And that's why I love the Bible. That's why I love it. It is worth to read. It is worth, to stick to the Bible. because this is true Word of God. Amen.